No. All right. Well, here we go.
Here we go.
Welcome, welcome everybody to another installment of Try This First. And this is the video series where I talk to fundraising experts and we get their advice on how to get started in different aspects of nonprofit leadership and fundraising strategy. So today, very excited to have with me James Plourde. James is the author of Ta-da! Finding Funding. And James is an expert consultant and fundraiser, and he's here today to talk to us about capital campaigns. And maybe this is the first time or one of the first times you're hearing that described, or maybe this might be more likely. Maybe you've been in a board meeting and a board member has said, hey, we should really do a capital campaign. And you're walking back to your desk thinking, I don't know where to start with that. So hopefully today, actually, I won't say hopefully, I know today, we're going to dig into some things that you can start with now to prepare yourself and your organization for such a serious fundraising effort. So, James, the question to you is, if someone is thinking about starting a capital campaign, what should they try first?
Well, typically, Chris, I find that like, hey, let's start a capital campaign comes after a conversation about a number of things. So, a board is engaged in conversations about their program or about their facilities or about expanding or about this or about that. And then that kind of leads to, well, okay, how are we going to fund this? So, hey, development director, how about we do a capital campaign? And I want to bring up an ancient proverb about the best time to plant a tree.
Mhm.
And Chris, you know when the best time to plant a tree is, right?
I do. I do. It was 20 years ago.
It's 20 years ago. And but the second next best time to plant a tree is now. But using that 20 years ago analogy, while these conversations that your board will be having about the new program, the new building, undoubtedly will not occur 20 years ago. They will occur, months ago. There
Mhm.
is some, benefit to that, analogy because the capital campaign likely just doesn't spring out of nowhere. So as these conversations are happening, the savvy development director or executive director will know that that's likely where this is heading. So in preparation of that, hopefully that by the time that question comes up, there will be some thought put into some of the things that we're going to talk about getting ready for a campaign. If not, and it truly is something that's, kind of emerges, a few things to do first that I would recommend. Um, One of which is, align your experts, align your team members for whatever this project is at the beginning. So, for example, if it's going to be a new facility, it's going to involve architects, it's going to involve lenders, realtors, etc. What I find is that nonprofits are good at bringing all those people together, but not the campaign consultant. That person gets brought in after all that work has been done, and now we need to do a campaign. So my first advice is bring your campaign team. If you're going to be bringing in a consultant, bring that person in right alongside those others so that you can begin planning as a unified effort. Often I see nonprofits wait because they figure they need to know, excuse me, they need to know, well, how much money do we need to raise? And until we know that, we're not going to bring in a campaign consultant. But the reality is that the campaign consultant or whoever you're hiring for that
Mhm.
purpose can help you lay the groundwork in terms of messaging, positioning, et cetera. So that would be like one of the very first things that I would consider.
That's a great place to start. And I think it's worth kind of shining a light on the fact that your organizational need alone is not strategy. Just because you need it or just because you want to raise, 100,000, a million, $100 million, that's not enough. There needs to be really thoughtful donor strategy involved because just because you want it doesn't mean you'll get it. I mean, it seems simple when we say it that way, but I've seen a lot of organizations just think that their need will be enough to inspire secret donors who have not given before. So it's
Right,
really important to think through these things.
right,
So James, from your perspective and from your experience in leading capital campaigns and helping nonprofits with capital campaigns, tell me about the that case for support, that story that the nonprofit has to be able to tell about why they're building a building or something like that.
right. You know, Chris, you really set me up well because you use the term the nonprofits need, that they have a need. And unfortunately, in my case, that's where it begins when really from the donor perspective, they don't really care about the nonprofits need, right?
Yep.
They care about the community's need. So as you're organizing your thinking about this going into a capital campaign, the first thing that needs to be clarified is the need or the problem in the community that you are going to be addressing. What is it? And very importantly, why is it a need? Why is it a problem? Nonprofits that are in the weeds on particular issues, whether that's, homelessness or, child abuse or the symphony or, anything that is they are up to their eyeballs in it every day. So they see problems and needs, but they don't realize the rest of the community doesn't necessarily realize why it should be so. They need to be educated. So, what is the problem? Why is it a problem?
Mm-hmm.
That's first. Second, what is the solution? What is your proposed solution, which will have a dollar figure attached to it? And then the third thing is you, the nonprofit. How are you, the nonprofit, going to be the catalyst to make this happen? Unfortunately, I see a lot of that turned around. The nonprofits first, the problem second, the donors third.
Yeah.
And I just think that needs to be reversed in order to gain traction with your potential donors out there.
Yeah, and a story like that, a case for support like that, that I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume that takes a lot of input from a lot of different stakeholders. That's not something you just knock out one day in between calls.
Right.
How have you seen organizations kind of build that story inside?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the best case statements and the best campaigns come out of a strategic planning process. So the organization has, done the work to sort of lay out the roadmap for the next 4 or 5, however many years the plan goes toward. And that requires, stakeholders, input, et cetera. But one piece that really is important and if you're thinking about your plan in terms of a potential case for support, a potential campaign, one area that's really important is to get outsiders to validate your plan and your need. So, for example, if you're the, provider of homeless services,
Hmm.
okay, it's one thing for you to talk about all the needs that are required to care for this population, but you're the homeless service provider. So it's kind of like, the Toyota salesperson espousing the virtues of buying a Toyota. Okay.
Right, right.
So of course you're going to espouse those needs. That's what your job is. But what do the city authorities think about? How about the police chief? What about the EMS group? What about, religious organizations that provide services for the homeless? How do they all view this particular solution? And are they at least willing to give their voice to it? Because it gives it additional credibility in the philanthropic marketplace, that it's not just you saying this is a good idea, that it is others who are outside of your organization, but in that space,
Yeah, they're
amplifying it.
outsiders, but they're connected in the cause with you. They're not, random people. But that's a really interesting point because that goes back to what you were saying about not centering the organization needs, but centering the cause and the problem and the solutions. And then these community voices, these other voices are then kind of rising up in support of it. And that's a really, really, I think that's an often overlooked step.
It
Yeah.
it is, and it also shows funders another very important thing that they're looking for, and that is collaboration, and that you're not just operating as a solo practitioner in the middle of a
Hmm.
of a topic. And I pick homelessness as an issue. I mean, oh my goodness, there are so many organizations and pieces and government and nonprofit, et cetera, religious, et cetera, that are, have some piece of this issue.
Hmm.
For you to come out with a solution that doesn't take into account any of those other players, as well and as sound as it might be, it just will not play as well with your donors as it will showing how you fit in this ecosystem, working with these other players, and are moving something forward. Foundations, I know foundation officers typically bemoan the fact that they get proposals from similar organizations, with similar solutions to similar problems, and there's no sense that any of them are coordinating or
Right.
talking to each other. And I'm not talking about a massive revamp or a merger of your organization with other organizations, but just the fact that you can prove dialogue and working together is, I think, very important. Should be
Yeah.
a part of your strategic plan, of course, but that should come out in your case for support.
Right. And I think that issue is probably tied into, and this is probably a longer and different conversation, but that issue of nonprofits not always collaborating or coordinating together, that stems, I think, from, the scarcity mindset, from the
Yeah,
idea that these are my donors. If I send them to James to talk, they're going to leave me and go to James. Like I've seen that. I have bought into that mindset in the early days of my career, and it's a very insidious um, kind of framework to have in your head. Um, Jumping back to capital campaigns though, so I love the idea of getting that, the larger community to get together. I love the idea of making sure your campaign consultant is kind of at the table with the other outside authorities you have, looking at the project of building something or creating something new. Tell me about the role the consultant should be playing when it comes to talking to existing donors, because my understanding is, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't want to launch a campaign like this without having some pretty focused conversations with your existing donors, because it's not like you're going to get, um, six, seven figure gifts from strangers.
right.
That's a fairy tale. So talk to me about that.
Yeah. Well, what's to say? A couple of things. First of all, if you are embarking on a capital campaign, even if the mindset among the board is, well, we've just got to do this, we've just got to raise the money, the need is so pressing, et cetera, et cetera. My counsel is to do a campaign planning study, because that whole thing you just said, Chris, about introducing this concept to your donors, the golden rule is donors don't care that you're in a hurry. Donors don't care that you're already down the road and you've incurred all these fees, and oh my goodness, we need to start raising money because we got to pay all these people. They don't really resonate with that. That's not
Yeah.
what motivates them. So being able to ask donors for advice before you start asking them for money is a good way to go. I recommend, in an ideal world, having some sort of large gatherings, coffees, whatever, with groups of donors, just to sort of outlay what you're thinking of, what you're
Hmm.
really to gather feedback, and then bringing in the campaign consultant to do a campaign planning study where you take 20, 25 of your top donors and really have individualized interviews and really drill down on what they think about the project, what they think about the sponsoring organization, and ultimately what they're thinking about in terms of a potential contribution and what roadblocks may exist. The information that you gather will be invaluable in planning your strategy for actually launching the campaign and actually putting together your final case, because a study also involves sort of a straw man case that donors are able to comment upon, pick
Hmm.
apart. You'll be able to tell which areas resonate of that case, which areas don't, which areas may be turning people off. And you'll be able to take that information and craft it into a final case that puts your best foot forward.
Excellent. Excellent. And I think I'll call attention to this thing that obviously having two consultants talking about how important it is to hire consultants, it's a little self-serving. But I think the truth is, and the fact is, you do kind of want that, you know, expert outsider voice talking to your donors. I would, that seems to me that kind of maybe unlocks some conversation that the donor might not be willing to engage in if they're talking to the gift officer they know really well. If they have concerns about the campaign or concerns about the organization, they might feel hesitant to share that in a conversation, right?
Yeah, they absolutely are. And I think the point of the role of consultants and it being self-serving, I think that's really accurate. And the only way that I can say is when you're choosing a consultant, talk to other nonprofits that have recently run campaigns, ask
Hmm.
who they've used, ask if they were happy with that person. You can really vet consultants pretty easily in this town or anywhere
Hmm.
because there are so many nonprofits that are running campaigns at any one time. And, it's kind of like your family doctor, I mean, at some point you've got to trust that person. And if
Yeah.
the person says you need to do these tests, well, you do these tests,
Yeah.
and but to my point is I've also bit on campaigns where we did not do a planning study,
Mm.
where the client was like, hey, we're going to do this anyway. We've got to do this. Let's just get in and do it. We'll save the money for the study, blah, blah, blah. And they just haven't gone that well. That's all I could say. We uncover problems as we're in the middle of the campaign. We're asking people for money that the nonprofit is feeling is going to be a 6-figure, 7-figure donor, and they give zero. They're just not interested.
Right.
And to not know that before we go in, it just is a real handicap.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about campaigns and hearing you talk about all kind of like the pre-work that has to happen and going back to the tree planting analogy, obviously a campaign like this is something pretty significant and if you're searching for an analogy to use with your board, um, the one that's occurred to me in this conversation is like it's like running a marathon. You don't just get up one day and say, you know what, it's time to run the marathon. Like you've got to work out, you've got to practice. Because what I'm hearing is there needs to be a lot of really consistent and strong, donor cultivation and stewardship work kind of to be done in the front end long before you even launch the campaign.
Yeah, it's really true. I mentioned the advice money, the analogy in fundraising is if you want if you how's it go? If you want advice, ask for money.
Hmm.
If you want money, ask for advice. And this study phase is the advice asking phase. So it really is warming donors up to the process. So I think that that study, a good study takes between 4 and 5 months to complete, and that's everything from doing your case statement, maybe doing some donor analytics, choosing the people that are going to be interviewed, maybe doing a online survey of your broader donor base beyond the 20 to 25 you're going to interview, getting those interviews, scheduling, doing them, and then doing the analysis and the report. But that time, I don't, I refer to that time as the startup phase of the campaign
Got it.
because it really is. I rarely come back, and my colleagues rarely come back from a study and say, no, zero, you can't move forward, stop immediately. There typically is some path forward. It may not be on the time frame that the client
Hmm.
is hoping for, but there typically is a time frame or a place going forward. I mean, if you go, I'm sorry, my nose is itchy. If you go during the in the phase of and I've been in the phase of the study and the CEO resigns or something big happens,
Yeah.
then that may be a no-go. But really, other than that, there is a path forward typically.
Excellent. Something else that occurs to me too is that I've been when I'm thinking about this series and our conversation, I'm kind of picturing the viewer or the listener as being like like being a fundraiser, being the director of development or the head of a fundraising team. But now I'm really thinking too about from the perspective of an executive director or CEO. One kind of crucial element here, again, if we can take it as read that capital campaign requires planning and structure, it requires research, requires like careful application of fundraising fundamentals. It's a real emphasis, it's a real investment. But one of the ways you can, I think, prepare for success is make sure the head of your fundraising team is involved in or connected to like large strategic conversations. Like if you've been having, oh, we've been talking about this new building plan for 7 months, and then all after 7 months, you bring in your director of development and say, Sally, it's time. We want to do a capital campaign. Like you're setting her up to fail. You really have to make sure that fundraising is part of that future planning. So someone can say, hey, if we're going to do this in 10 years or 5 years, I need to start prepping now. We need to start. There's a lot of work you have to do. So that's a really, I think that's a point for leadership too. We really got to keep your fundraising team in the loop.
You got to keep them in the loop, and you got to keep them excited. I mean, you
Yes.
know, that excitement over this project seeps through, and it's hard to manufacture. And just to go back to my car sales example, if you're selling a brand of car that you really think is a great value, a great car, a great, that's one thing. If you're selling a car that you think's not that good and a clunker and people are spending too much money for it, yeah, that's your job. You'll sell it, but it's just with not as much enthusiasm. So you really need to gin up your fundraising team. You need to get them on board, really feeling great about this, answering their questions or their concerns about it as well. You'll have a much better outcome when they're out there in the community.
Got it.
Yeah.
We started this call with the scenario, the imaginary scenario of a board member telling a development director or a fundraising team, like, okay, go out and do a capital campaign. Um, Tell me about the role of a board in a capital campaign. Like, what should they be, if before they sign up for doing this, what should they be expecting?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, again, is we're in our scenario where we're marching down the path that's eventually going to lead to a campaign. One of the things to put in the board's minds early is the fact that in order to successfully launch a campaign, we're going to need 100% board participation in the campaign. By that, I mean they all need to make a financial contribution or a pledge. And they need to make it commensurate with what they would give to one of the top three charities on their priority list. And that could be $1,000 for one person, $100,000 for another person, or $100 for another person. It really doesn't matter, but the thoughtful discernment. So it's somewhere between, well, just give anything so we can be in and counted. That's not the approach. But on the
Right.
other hand, it's not like, well, we all need to give $5,000 minimum. That's not the approach either. But the board should be in first. They should be in a generous way. And then they should also be prepared to help lean in terms of, sharing contacts and information that they have about the donor community. But the other important group that the board needs to be involved in is recruiting a campaign committee. Most campaigns have a campaign steering committee.
Okay.
And one of the things that I see that I feel is the wrong approach is approaching volunteers or potential volunteers who you feel are well connected and could help move this forward with the question, will you serve on our campaign committee? The reason why that's the wrong question is you don't want their primary motivation to be serving on a committee. So
Mm,
the question is, hey, we're doing this capital effort. We need some volunteers to help move this forward. Would you be willing to help? If you can get a yes there, then the question is, well, how would you be willing to move forward? Or maybe here's a list of our prospects. Are there folks you know? Get them engaged in the work, and then maybe have a committee meeting, I don't know, once a quarter or once every other month to celebrate success, to bring the group together. But I've seen too many nonprofits step off on this. We're forming a committee mode, and then you get 15 people on a committee and 3 people are doing the work. Um, I provided counsel for a $30 million campaign. Our initial campaign committee was 3 people,
Wow.
and the development director and staff. But those 3 volunteers worked. They put their, they made contacts, they made calls, and they got the work done, and it was wildly successful. So that's you know, the attitude that I would go into it in recruiting volunteers. Volunteers are absolutely worth their weight in gold. But if the gold is misplaced, it's just going to drag you down to the bottom of the creek, because you don't want to recruit another set of bosses. You don't
Yep.
want to recruit another committee that you got to report on what's your progress and why haven't you raised so much by this date. And that's what the board's for. That's what your boss is for. You want people that are really going to be excited to lean in on this particular endeavor that you're launching.
That's I love that because I do think sometimes we think in the nonprofit space, the committee's going to do the work, so we're going to got to fill the committee. But to your point, it's really not about the number of people at the table. It's about their commitment. It's about the expectations you've set for them and how you're supporting their success.
Right.
This is great. All right, so go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the expectations that you set jointly, right? Because not
Yes,
all
yes.
volunteers are built the same, and some might be great picking up the phone and calling people. Others might be great hosting a gathering at their home. Others might be great at other aspects of the campaign. And so you don't want to set people up for failure by saying, okay, this is what everybody's got to do, and then people will fall short of that. So I just would say jointly setting expectations is the way to start.
Well, it connects to a topic that has come up in a lot of these calls, which is the importance of relationship building and building these strong, authentic relationships. So you can't just, have a one size fits all committee. You want to sit down with those members and really have a conversation about their work and what do they like to do? How, finding that customized approach instead of just saying, well, if you're on the committee, you're making 100 phone calls a week and that's the end of the conversation. Well, you can say that, but you probably won't get the results you want. Yeah.
I say that's
So I'm
true.
yeah, and just to recap a little bit, we're coming up at the end of our time. So,
Yeah.
you know, ideally, if you're thinking about starting a capital campaign, you've got years, right? You've got some time. And in that time between now and this future state, you are building those relationships with donors. You are building relationships with your board members. You are creating that mission and that cause, and you're really kind of creating that infrastructure. So when the time comes, then you can start bringing together your experts. Then you can start really sharpening that story. And again, James, to your point, the story is about the cause and the solution, the problem and the solution. It's not about you. It's not about we need to build this building. We've already broken ground. We got to build this building.
Right.
That's your need. That's not strategy. So really getting all that work done. And if you're on the leadership side of an organization, if you're a board member, if you're an executive director, really think clearly about the idea of a capital campaign. It's not something you can, switch on and switch off. It's not something you can just say, I declare a capital campaign and poof, it happens, right? You've got to really put the work in. James, is there anything else that folks should know or think about if they're kind of in the early days of even thinking about capital campaigns?
I think the last thing I'd want to say, Chris, is that if you are planning to raise a significant amount of money over a defined period of time,
Hmm.
just know that you will require human resources and expenditures to do it. You can't, be running an organization that say raises $2 million a year, and then all of a sudden launch a $10 million campaign and feel you're going to do it with those same level of resources. Now, the good news is that campaign costs, I always recommend, get built into the campaign goal,
Hmm.
so that you are now startup costs, the planning study, those kinds of things are not. But once you're in the campaign, but nonetheless, there are costs, there are expenditures. that you need to be prepared to make. And don't just look at your existing team and say, okay, now we're going to raise whatever the $10 million over the next 5 years. Go do it and expect them to be happy and enthused. Those excited fundraisers that we need out there in the community. So, set your expectations and know that you'll need additional support and resources to carry it out. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Especially since in the midst of your campaign, you are still raising money you need for operations and
right.
programs. It's
Absolutely.
the
Absolutely.
work is still getting done. So if you're expecting if your fundraising team, like you said, is bringing you in $2 million a year, it's unlikely, if not impossible, for them to just jump from 2 to 10 without. Do they have more support, more tech support, more? So they're bringing in another major gift officer, bringing in another grant office. Like there's all sorts of different personnel and structures that you might need to consider in order to make this work, or else the end result is if you don't do that, you're risking burnout, you're risking, and then you'll really lose momentum. You lose
Yeah.
stuff.
And you won't go from 2 to 10 unless you've got the donors to take you there. So it's both.
Mhm.
You need the staff to work the donors, but if the donors aren't there, adding more staff isn't going to make it happen
Right.
either. So those two really need to go in concert, which is why the planning is so important, because it kind of reveals whether you've got those donors or potential donors there
Hmm.
where you launch your, build up your staff or build up your team.
Yeah, love that. Okay, James, let's tell people where they can find you and find your book, which I can
Yes, thank you. It's a
seriously
book.
recommend. It's a great read and has some really good thoughts in there about bringing a fundraiser on board.
Thank you. Yeah, my goal is for really for any fundraiser, sort of a handbook of how to go through the solicitation process, the cultivation process, but primarily targeted to new to the field and people who hire them. Onboarding is not a strong suit of many nonprofits, I've found. So that's why I wrote the book, to help with that process, but hopefully to give people some, things to think about along the way that may help them do things differently and more effectively. And you can find it on that little Seattle bookstore called Amazon. And
Ah,
you
I've heard
can
of that.
download a hard copy or a digital copy, whatever is your preference.
Love it. And James, where can people find you to learn more about the work you do in the nonprofit space?
Yeah, my website is jpfundraising.com. My business is JP Fundraising Solutions. If you Google either of those, you'll get to me. I'm based in Tacoma, and yeah, would love to talk with you. As I've said, I would rather have a free hour-long conversation with you about your plans, and provide that initial counsel so we get off on a good foot, than to respond to an RFP, get a contract, and then be in the middle of it and not really have that background. So
Yeah.
please feel free to contact me.
Love it. Love it. Well, James, thank you again for taking the time. I'll share with our viewers, this is actually the second complete take of this episode. First time we recorded, my Wi-Fi decided to take a little break and I was glitchy for the whole thing. So any glitches you see is just purely my fault, not technology. But thank you for being a part of this, James. Thank you for everyone watching. Try This First. We'll have more Try This First coming soon, but keep up the good work and we'll talk soon. Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Chris. Bye-bye.